When a dinner at a high-end restaurant turns into a moment of humiliation, an officer's arrogance collides with a truth he never expected. He thought he could mock her, belittle her, treat her like she didn't belong. But what he didn't know, the woman he was insulting held more power than he could ever imagine. The soft glow of chandeliers lit the elegant space. Dr. Maya Brooks sat at her table, calm, composed, sipping her wine. Across the room, Officer Chad Walker leaned back in his chair, laughing with his friends. Then he made a comment that would change everything. "Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. Stay till the end. You won't believe how this one ends." The restaurant was bathed in warm, golden light, the soft murmur of conversation blending with the gentle clinking of silverware. It was the kind of place where people spoke in hushed tones, where luxury was expected, not flaunted. Dr. Maya Brooks sat at her table, composed and unbothered. She wasn't just well-dressed. She carried herself with the kind of quiet confidence that turned heads without effort. A deep red dress, sleek hair, an expensive watch that caught the light as she sipped her wine. She wasn't here to impress anyone. She belonged. Across the room, Officer Chad Walker leaned back in his chair, laughing a little too loudly. Mid-40s, broad-shouldered with a permanent smirk that hinted at years of getting his way. His badge, though unnecessary here, was clipped to his belt, a silent reminder of the authority he was used to. His eyes flicked to Maya. His smirk widened. He nudged his friend, tilting his chin in her direction. "Look at that," he muttered, loud enough to carry. "Didn't know they let just anyone in here." His friends chuckled, but some shifted in their seats, suddenly aware of how loud he was. Walker, though, wasn't done. He picked up his drink, shaking his head as if amused. "Guess standards are slipping?" Maya didn't react. Not yet. But inside, she knew. This was going to be a night Walker would never forget. The laughter from Officer Chad Walker's table grew louder. The kind of laughter that wasn't about amusement. It was about making sure everyone else knew they were laughing. His words hung in the air, thick with arrogance. Dr. Maya Brooks remained still. She had been in places like this before. Places where her presence alone seemed to challenge a certain type of man. A man like Walker, the kind who thought power was measured by how much space he could take up, how much control he could exert over others. Walker leaned forward, his drink swirling in his hand. "What do you think, fellas?" He gestured toward Maya without looking directly at her. "Some people just don't belong in places like this." A few of his friends chuckled, but others exchanged uneasy glances. A waiter passing by hesitated, looking toward Maya's table, unsure if he should step in. Walker noticed. He smirked. "Oh, don't worry. I'm sure she's used to the attention." He raised his voice just a little. After all, when was the last time someone like her sat in a place like this? This time, the room shifted. A few heads turned. Conversations lowered to whispers. Maya finally placed her glass down, slow and deliberate. She met Walker's gaze, her expression unreadable. "Excuse me." Her voice was calm, controlled. Walker grinned as if he had just been invited to play a game he knew he would win. "Oh, no offense," he said, though his tone said the opposite. "It's just surprising, that's all. Some places have a certain standard." One of his friends cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "Maybe we should just—" Walker waved him off. "I'm just making conversation." He leaned back again, tipping his glass toward Maya's table. "Tell me, what do you do?" Maya's expression didn't change. "Why does that matter?" Walker's smirk widened. "Just curious." He shrugged. "People usually end up in places like this one of two ways, money or connections." He tilted his head. "So, which one is it?" Maya held his gaze. The room was quiet now. Other guests weren't speaking, but they were listening. Walker grinned like he had just won. Maya exhaled softly. "It's always interesting," she said, "how people like you assume so much with so little information." Walker's smirk faltered for just a second, but he covered it quickly. "People like me?" He let out a short laugh. Now, let's not be dramatic." Maya folded her hands on the table. "Oh, I'm not." Walker raised an eyebrow, waiting. Maya took a breath. "People like you walk into a room and assume you own it. You believe that anyone who doesn't look like you, talk like you, or move like you must be out of place." Walker's jaw tightened. Maya continued. "You're so used to seeing yourself as the one in control, the one with the power, that the idea of someone like me sitting here, existing in the same space as you, bothers you. So you laugh, you make comments, you hope I'll shrink under your words." Walker scoffed. "Shrink?" He shook his head. "Lady, I'm just making conversation." Maya tilted her head slightly. "Are you?" A pause. Maya picked up her glass again, taking a slow sip. "Because to me, it sounds like you're trying to remind me where you think I belong." Walker sat up straighter now. His smirk was still there, but the ease was gone. He glanced at his friends, expecting them to laugh, but they didn't. Maya set her glass down. "So, tell me, Officer Walker." The smirk vanished. Maya's eyes didn't leave his. "What exactly is it that makes you feel so entitled to this space?" Walker blinked. "Excuse me?" Maya leaned in slightly. "You see, I could ask you the same thing you asked me. What are you doing here?" Walker hesitated. Maya didn't. "But I won't. Because unlike you, I don't assume that someone doesn't belong just because they don't fit into the little box I built for them in my mind." Walker's face reddened slightly. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. The silence was thick now. The entire restaurant was listening. Maya exhaled, shaking her head slightly. "You've had a lot to say about me tonight, Officer Walker." Her voice was steady. "Would you like to know who I am?" Walker hesitated again, but the damage was already done. Maya reached for her purse, pulled out a slim leather wallet and flipped it open. She set it on the table between them. The badge inside caught the light. Walker's face drained of color. Maya's voice didn't waver. "Dr. Maya Brooks, Chief of Civil Rights Investigations, U.S. Department of Justice Silence." Walker blinked, once, twice. His hands, which had been so relaxed moments ago, curled slightly on the table. The weight of his mistake had just hit him. Maya picked up her wallet and tucked it away again, her face unreadable. Then she smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Now," she said, tilting her head slightly, "would you like to continue this conversation?" Walker swallowed hard. For the first time all night, he had nothing to say. The restaurant fell silent. Officer Chad Walker sat stiffly, his fingers twitching near his drink. His face, once filled with arrogance, had lost all color. He had spent the entire evening mocking a woman who now held his entire career in her hands. Dr. Maya Brooks remained calm. She had seen this reaction before. The moment when someone who believed they held all the power realized they had none. Walker cleared his throat, forcing a chuckle. "All right, I get it now. You're important." Maya didn't blink. "And before you knew that?" Walker shifted in his chair. "Come on, let's not turn this into something bigger than it is." Maya tilted her head slightly. "Bigger than what, Officer Walker? Bigger than the way you spoke to me? Bigger than the way you carry yourself in spaces where you assume control belongs to you?" Walker rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding her gaze. "I was joking. You're making this personal." Maya folded her hands in front of her. "You made it personal the moment you decided I didn't belong here." Walker exhaled sharply, his frustration barely contained. "Look, I don't want any problems." Maya's expression didn't change. "The problem isn't whether you want one. The problem is that you created one. Walker's friends, who had been enjoying the evening just moments ago, now looked anywhere but at him. They had laughed with him, encouraged him, but now they wanted distance. Maya picked up her napkin, smoothing it against the table. How many times have you done this before? Walker frowned. What? Maya lifted her eyes to meet his. How many times have you used your position to make someone feel smaller? How many times have you spoken with authority that wasn't earned but demanded? Walker's jaw tightened. I don't have to answer that. Maya nodded slowly. No, you don't. But someone else might. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, scrolling through the screen with steady fingers. Walker leaned forward, his voice lower. What are you doing? Maya didn't look up. Checking records. Walker's hands curled into fists. That's confidential. Maya let out a soft breath. Is it? Walker's face burned. He glanced at the guests around them, realizing just how many eyes were still on him. Maya set the phone down, finally looking at him again. You have a history, Officer Walker. A history of complaints. A history of misconduct. A history of thinking that a badge gives you permission to behave however you want. Walker opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Maya leaned forward slightly. You want to talk about belonging. Let's talk about whether you belong in the position you hold. Walker swallowed hard. Listen, Maya lifted a hand, stopping him. You assumed I was just another person you could disrespect without consequence. That was your first mistake. But your second, she gestured toward the entrance. Thinking no one would hold you accountable. Walker followed her gaze. A man in a dark suit had stepped inside. He wasn't looking at the menu or searching for a table. He was looking straight at Walker. Walker's breath caught. He recognized that stance, that presence. Maya smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I made a call. Walker's throat tightened. You didn't have to do that. Maya's expression remained neutral. You didn't have to do any of this. But you did. Walker's fingers curled around the edge of the table. He had walked into the restaurant feeling untouchable. He was leaving, knowing that was never true. Maya picked up her glass, taking a slow sip. You should go. Walker hesitated. For the first time, he didn't have a comeback. He didn't have control. He didn't have the last word. Maya didn't look at him again. Your night just changed, Officer Walker. And something tells me your career did too. Walker stood up, his movements stiff. The man at the entrance took a step forward. Walker swallowed, then walked toward him. The restaurant remained silent as he left. Maya finished her meal in peace. Walker? He was about to learn what it felt like to answer for his actions. Chad Walker sat in the back seat of the car, staring at the back of the headrest in front of him. His hands were clenched into fists, but he knew better than to say anything yet. The air between him and the man in the driver's seat felt heavy. The man didn't turn around when he spoke. Officer Walker, you're in a lot of trouble. Walker forced a chuckle, though his voice came out uneven. Trouble? This is just a misunderstanding. I didn't do anything wrong. The man sighed, finally turning slightly to glance at him in the mirror. Didn't do anything wrong? He shook his head. Tell me, how many times have you said that before? Walker's mouth opened, but no words came out. Back at the restaurant, Dr. Maya Brooks finished the last sip of her wine. The whispers around her had grown louder. People were finally paying attention. Some looked ashamed, some intrigued, but no one was laughing anymore. The waiter approached hesitantly. Would you like anything else, ma'am? Maya set her glass down. Just the check, please. Walker, meanwhile, was being led into an office. He recognized the place immediately. Internal Affairs. A room he had always walked past but never thought he would see from the inside. A file was placed on the desk in front of him. His name was on the front. The man sitting across from him flipped through the pages. his expression unreadable. Walker cleared his throat. "All right, so what is this? Some kind of review?" The man glanced up. "No, Walker, this is a reckoning." Walker shifted in his seat. "This is ridiculous. That woman—" The man cut him off. "Dr. Maya Brooks." Walker stiffened. The man closed the file. "She wasn't just another guest at the restaurant. She's been working with the Department of Justice, reviewing misconduct cases. Your name was already on her list. Tonight just made you a priority." Walker's stomach dropped. His name, already on the list. He leaned forward. "This is political. You're making an example out of me." The man didn't blink. "No, Officer Walker, you made an example of yourself." Walker exhaled sharply. "You can't just suspend me over a conversation." The man shook his head. "This isn't about one conversation. This is about every stop, every complaint, every moment where you used your badge to remind someone of their place. Tonight just confirmed what we already knew." Walker's fingers tightened around the arms of his chair. "And what exactly do you think you know?" The man didn't hesitate. "That you don't belong in uniform." Walker sat back, stunned into silence. The man leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. "You're officially on suspension pending full investigation. I'd suggest you get a lawyer." Walker's breath came faster now. This was real. The door opened. His time was up. Walker pushed himself to his feet, but his legs felt unsteady. He had walked into that restaurant thinking he owned the room. Now, he wasn't even sure if he owned his career anymore. As he stepped out, the reality hit him. For the first time, someone else held all the power, and there was nothing he could do about it. Chad Walker walked out of the Internal Affairs office, his mind racing. His world had shifted in a matter of hours. One night, one conversation, one mistake that couldn't be erased. His badge didn't feel as heavy on his hip anymore, because now he wasn't sure how much longer he would even have it. The whispers had already started in the department. Officers who once laughed at his jokes now avoided his gaze. Some smirked, as if they had seen this coming. Others shook their heads, realizing one of their own had finally pushed too far. Walker's phone buzzed. A message. Mandatory review meeting. Internal Affairs. He clenched his jaw. It wasn't over. Across the city, Dr. Maya Brooks sat at her desk, scrolling through reports. Walker was just one name on a much longer list. His case had moved faster than expected, but she knew the work wasn't done. Her office door opened. A colleague stepped in, setting down a folder. More complaints, more cases, more officers who thought they were untouchable. Maya sighed. This wasn't new. She'd seen it too many times before, but tonight had been different. Tonight, she didn't meet an officer in a conference room, reviewing reports. Tonight, she met one face-to-face. Meanwhile, Walker sat in his car, gripping the wheel. He could feel it happening, the slow unraveling of everything he thought was secure. The news was already spreading. Someone had recorded the restaurant encounter. The video was circulating. He watched himself on the screen, his own voice playing back in his ears. His arrogance, his words, the moment his confidence shattered when he saw Maya's badge. Comments flooded in. This is why people don't trust cops. He thought he was untouchable. Accountability is long overdue. Walker turned off his phone. For the first time, he understood what it felt like to have his actions held against him. Back at the department, Internal Affairs prepared their next steps. Maya's testimony was already documented. The complaints against Walker had been reopened. This time, there would be no quiet dismissal. No warnings, no second chances. His career wasn't just under review. It was over. Walker had spent years deciding the fate of others, believing himself to be above consequence. Now, He was just another name on a list. And for the first time, he had no control over what happened next. This story isn't just about one bad officer. It's about a system that protects them. Chad Walker thought he was untouchable. He mocked, insulted, and humiliated someone he assumed had no power. But in one moment, the truth flipped his world upside down. The woman he tried to put down was the one who had the power to take everything from him. Now, his career is over. His reputation is ruined. And the people who once laughed with him, they're staying silent. But here's the thing. This isn't just his story. This happens every day. How many times have people in power gotten away with behavior like this? How many people have been disrespected, mistreated, or ignored simply because they didn't fit someone else's idea of who belongs? We need to talk about it. And that starts right now. Drop a comment below. Have you ever seen someone underestimate the wrong person? What happened next? Share your story. We're reading every single one. If this story made you think, don't just scroll away. Like this video, share it, and let's start a real conversation. And if you believe in accountability, hit that subscribe button. Because these are the stories that matter. Comment now. Let's talk.